It feels like I'm forever away from you in terms of the distances that we have here, and it's a wonderful space. The intimacy is kind of hard to keep when we're on a stage like this, but given that our technical materials are up here, that's exactly what we're going to do. So welcome to this session. As you are aware, the title is The Role of Universities and Community Colleges in Stimulating the Creative Economy Through Education and Commercialization. My name is Wayne Caldwell, and I'm on faculty at the University of Guelph, and I'm pleased to be here to moderate this session for you. We have three excellent presenters, and I'm quite looking forward to their comments. Perhaps by way of background, I want to share with you something. I had the pleasure of conducting a research project with Yolan Chan, I guess a little over a year ago, and as part of that we consulted with communities across southern Ontario, including eastern Ontario and southwestern Ontario. I think in total there would be 23, 25 workshops that we did, and it was all about identifying what are the research interests of rural communities in terms of the questions that they might have in terms of research. And I think there's an important connection to this conference in terms of what communities were saying. So just as an intro to our session, let me identify for you the 10 key items or the 10 key questions that rural communities had as we did that consultation. So the first thing that they were interested was research related to sustainable economic development. Secondly, what is their comparative advantage, which I think is an interesting question related to creative communities and creative economies. Youth retention, not surprisingly, was a highly rated item. It was number 3. Economic diversification in terms of what you might do in your community and how you might benefit from opportunity there. Labor migration and attraction was number 5, and the community that I live within is struggling to maintain its population. And I think for many communities away from the larger metropolitan centers in Ontario, that's an ongoing concern. Farm revitalization in terms of how the agricultural sector might adjust. Regional strategies in terms of how we might approach things in one part of the province versus another. And the number 8 item was small business development, and number 9 was skills training and education in terms of how we might approach things from that perspective in terms of education and so on. And the final item to round out that top 10 list was best practices in community economic development, best practices in planning, and so on. So I know this morning our speakers will speak to topics from a variety of perspectives. I'm sure they'll be quite diverse, and that will benefit from that diversity. But let me introduce, to start with, Susan Wood. Now, Susan has to leave following her presentation. And so we'll take questions, actually, to her immediately following her presentation, whereas I think with our other two presenters, we'll maybe take a couple of questions, but we'll hope for a good dialogue and discussion at the end of their session. So Susan, perhaps the first thing I should mention is she's a graduate of Guelph. She quite proudly says she's an Aggie from Guelph. So Susan is the director of the Office of Research here at Queen's University. And of course, folks who are familiar with the research process will know that there's all kinds of work from contracts and ethics and so on and so forth. So it's a really insightful perspective that she will bring. She brings to her position as research director, formerly with BioCap Canada Foundation, held an academic position here with the Department of Biology at Queen's, with teaching and research interests in plant secondary metabolism and genetics. And her academic training, as mentioned, includes the University of Guelph and graduate degrees here from Queen's University. So she farms with her family, I gather, in Prince Edward County. So I look forward to learning more about that perhaps too. So welcome, Susan.
Well, it does feel like we're a long ways away. So I guess the best thing I can do is create a little more sense of familiarity by perhaps expanding a little bit on who I am, so that you will have some inclination of why Yolande may have invited me to participate today, and I'm truly honored to do so. It's true, I am the director here in the Office of Research Services, and in that role I have a window on some of the partnerships that occur not only between universities and our partners that may be participating in the rural economy, but also between universities and colleges. And those relationships, I think, play a key role. So I'm going to be examining that. as a member of an earlier team that looked at issues around revitalizing rural economies, I also developed some interesting project work which is related to biomass and bioenergy, and working with rural communities as they explore those particular opportunities. And in fact, the reason I have to leave is because I'm meeting with one of those groups just a little farther east that are working on some projects to expand their own rural economy. And last but certainly not least, I was particularly intrigued by this opportunity to participate in a conference which tomorrow goes to Picton. I've spent about 25 years living in Prince Edward County, having moved there after my adventures at Guelph. And I am a small business owner and an agricultural producer. So in keeping with the idea that creativity is needed to survive in some of our economic climates today, I'm not a corn and oilseed producer like many of my neighbors. I'm a beekeeper, and I make my special niche market in that particular way, not only producing high-quality honey, but producing lavender honey, which is a particularly desirable product for that community as it begins to embrace a broad tourist base and really capitalizes on some of the extraordinary food opportunities in the county. So that interesting combination, I think it's an interesting combination, gives me some particularly broad perspectives on things. And what I've done is I've just created a set of very, very simple slides, kind of grade 3 level, which are signposts to keep me organized as I talk to you about the role for universities. So first we have to understand that I am going to be wearing my Queen's University hat, and I need to start by telling you a little bit about Queen's University for those of you who are not comfortable and familiar with Queen's. Queen's was founded by Royal Charter of Queen Victoria in 1841 as a charitable foundation. It's a really important framework for the institution because it focuses us on a mission that's a tripartite mission, and no one piece is to overbalance the others. So from 1841 and continuing right through to today, our mission is to provide teaching and education, to provide learning in the extension of knowledge, and to provide service to community. So when you think about what we're here talking about today, it's really an intriguing thing to realize that Queen's has been mandated to do exactly that combination of working with community partners and working to provide the intellectual capacity to support development and economic growth, not only in this area but across Canada. I pulled up the shield because I particularly like the shield. It does appeal to my sense of history, and for those of you who have lost your grasp of Latin, it says that wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times. A good slogan for 1841, and actually not a bad one for today either. So of course, from early beginnings with 8 students housed in the quadrangle that you may be familiar with off a little bit to the north of this particular building, we have moved into being a full-range university. We offer academic programs at the graduate and undergraduate levels. In total, we have about 22,000 university students here. Now, obviously, 14 and 3 from what I've provided here don't add up to 22. But we also have students that are embedded in our professional schools. We have residents in our 4 affiliated hospitals, and we have a very large number of part-time students. We also have about 1,100 faculty, and that includes our clinicians. Many people think of universities and the academic environment and fail to realize that health is a particularly strong focus, not only here at Queen's, But right across Canada, we have 44 universities in Canada right now, and health is an issue that touches each one of those. And I think that's an important piece as we talk about revitalizing rural communities. Our operating budget here is about $400 million, and we have had a steady increase in the amount of research dollars that we're able to attract to this particular institution. 2010, we had about $192 million on sponsored funded research, which is quite a dramatic increase over the year before and a dramatic increase over the year before that. So we're on the right trajectory. And we have a very high level of research intensity. That's just literally the number of dollars that each researcher gets to work with. So what does that really mean? It means that we have a tremendous capacity on the faculty side to develop innovative ideas and to engage and encourage young people who wish to work with those highly trained faculty members. You can see from the numbers that I presented that we have a lot of graduate students. We're working hard to increase that number. And they come not only from Canada, but from around the world. Right now we have graduate students here that represent 83 different countries. So I think the point that I'd like to make and emphasize over and over is that rural economic development is a local thing. It happens here in the Kingston region, and we have some really wonderful specific projects that are focused at the local region. But we also work really hard on models that can be transplanted, not only here in Eastern Ontario. I'm working very closely with a number of the communities that are in Northern Ontario that are looking to the models we're developing here to see their fit and relevance in other regions of Ontario and in Canada. And of course, those 83 country representatives are planning to take those same models back to their homes. So the way that we can best extend that information then is no surprise to anyone here in this room. It's by creating partnerships that address our common goals and bring together complementary core capacities. How do we find each other is a real issue. And so I want to spend a few minutes talking about that. And after the fact, I would really encourage you to meet up with Diane Davies, who is one of the team members from the Office of Research Services. You can wave, Diane. Diane is the embodiment of the institutional approach for creating partnerships. Her work at ORS is largely focused on working with researchers to find the partners that they need at other institutions, whether it's at the theoretical level in universities or a more tactical level embodied in our local community colleges, and to marry those partnerships with those who are working in our communities. She has some pretty interesting strategic approaches for finding those partners, and it becomes the development of a database of experience and incredible intellectual capacity, which is not housed strictly in universities by any stretch. Institutions are always looking for those knowledgeable members within their partner communities. And the core capacities that we bring are quite different. So what we're looking at, perhaps, is a theoretical expertise embodied within the university, along with a tactical expertise embodied in the community college, combined then with a local community partner that brings the on-the-ground relevance, the understanding of the context in which a project must fly, in which economic development is actually carried out. One of the things that Diane would be quick to tell you is important is identifying potential barriers or competing interests, and this is an ongoing effort. Now, I would expect that when Steve talks to you, he's going to bring in interests in intellectual property, in publication, things that are really important to the economic enterprise of the institution and the individuals who develop new technologies and ideas. Those are often barriers for large industries. Perhaps John will speak to that. But they can also be barriers for development within small economic units, small businesses or communities as they're moving forward. intellectual property, although it can have tremendous economic value, can also present a barrier. So that's one that we recognize and we address through various contractual relationships, and we discuss very, very early. No one likes surprises. What they do like is success. And so it's also important to develop what your definition of success will be for each of the partners at the table, whether it's a researcher who has something to explore, whether it's the local community and what their particular needs are, and a group that I haven't spoken much of, but is critically important to the enterprise, are students. And students have their own particular agendas. Certainly they want to get a degree, that's the first agenda item, and they need to have the tools and the opportunity to achieve that goal. But they're also very interested in figuring out how the world works, in looking for potential employment, in being able to take transferable skills into different jobs. And so figuring out what the metrics are for each individual and each group represented around the table is extremely important. What I'm telling you is that the planning piece is probably far more important than the actual implementation. If you get the planning right, the implementation will follow quite smoothly. And one thing that I fear that we don't do near enough of, and so an excellent outcome of this particular conference, is to celebrate our successes. People tend to get caught up in rolling forward and moving very, very quickly, and don't mark the tiny milestones that together make a project successful. So I have a background in sciences and the maths, and the truth is I'm a horrible math fear kind of person. So I learned probably in grade 2 that if you show your work, sometimes you get part marks. So this is me showing my work. I was trying to figure out if I could articulate a list of benefits for the institution, whether it's a university or community college, and for the partners that might play in a particular partnership arena. And what I discovered was that as I wrote down a particular characteristic on one side, it showed up on the other side. So both the institution and the community partner are looking for expertise. The expertise is really different, but they're both looking for expertise. They're also looking to expand their perspectives. Institutions, by their very nature, have the opportunity to have global and national connections. And they bring a lot of expertise from that 30,000-foot level. Oftentimes, local communities can benefit from knowing what's going on in another part of their province, their country, or from around the world. On the other hand, what the institution lacks is the perspective from the ground. And it's extremely important for those community partners to share their perspectives of, does this fit in our local community? Can we make this work? What are our particular barriers and needs? So both sides benefit from shared perspectives. Both sides also benefit from our shared student experiences and the employment opportunities. I thought it was particularly important that we've already heard about that strong community desire to keep young people in the community, keep their expertise, their energy, their passion close to home, and that we create resilient, valuable, worthwhile employment for them in their home regions. As I mentioned earlier, I'm working with some northern communities, and this is of particular importance. My kids have grown up in Prince Edward County, and certainly they love Eastern Ontario, but it's such a corridor from here to London that they don't think anything of driving 3 or 4 hours up and down the 401 to flip between school and jobs and family. And that's not the case in other parts of the country, as I'm sure many of you have already experienced. One of the things both sides really needs is an opportunity to test their ideas. And acting as a testing ground within the confines of a research project or a pilot or a demonstration gives both sides the chance to explore in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be able to fully develop. Now, partly that's related to resources, and partly that's related simply to the setting aside of time, expertise, talent, resources to try something that's a little bit different. It's an opportunity to approach a new idea with an eye to risk management, such that you're not embodying the entire risk by doing a project by yourself. And finally, those shared resources cannot be underestimated. Now, it's lovely for us to be able to share students, but projects require funding, and institutions have access to certain types of funding. Communities have access to different types of funding, and there are many pools of funding emerging that require both of you to come to the table together. And so those shared financial resources are a new and key piece. The OECD has offered us this assessment, and I'm actually going to read it to you. The ability to create economic value from intellectual assets is highly contingent on the management capabilities of individual firms and the implementation of appropriate business strategies. I think it's a solid statement, but what does it mean? When we talk about appropriate business strategies, we can look at that from that theoretical institutional perspective of what is a good business approach. What are sound, resilient business practices? But that may be a very different business strategy than what happens on the ground. So for example, at home, my business strategy is to produce a niche market item, produce a very, very small amount of it in the hopes that that will create a high demand, and sell it all before it's produced. That's a local business strategy that works for me, but it wouldn't work for many other items, many other commodities, in many other settings, especially where you have a much higher level of competition for the same item. It brings it to the idea that every situation must be determined by the partners that are participating, and that it must be relevant. And I think the place that I'd like to finish is that the opportunity to have partnerships within the community brings relevance to the theoretical work that is undertaken within university institutions. And it gives an opportunity for actual hands-on application from those that are working out of community colleges. I think that you're going to hear many more specific ideas and case studies, I hope, but I'm happy to entertain a few questions before I gallop off down to Prescott, where a community is looking at some bioenergy options.
Thanks very much, Susan. We do have time for a few questions, so I think there's a question over there, please.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm just curious, do you find maybe one concrete example or best practice that you could share with us from your own experience?
A best practice in how to develop a partnership? Yes, absolutely. I was going to say drink a lot of beer, but that makes it sound like I'm from the county. I should say wine. I think the key ingredient is time. One of the things that we don't make space for as we develop our partnerships is sufficient time for them to mature. A resilient partnership is based on trust on both sides. That requires demonstration of trustworthy behavior, and it simply means that you need to get to know each other. You need to understand what those driving forces are, what's the motive behind each partner. You need to understand what's really truly important, where their goes and no-goes are, and work to see whether there truly is enough commonality in your goals that you can work well together. I fear that sometimes we create marriages of convenience around funding opportunities, for example. I think that's a real risk within universities and colleges that are looking for partners at this point because they'd like to be able to take advantage of a particular opportunity. It's difficult to create the structures that allow us to spend enough time together to really get to know one another. Now, having said that, sometimes the best way to get to know one another is to work together on a project, but it takes a lot of forbearance if you don't know each other well and there's competing interests.
Please, go ahead.
You mentioned the importance of measuring success, and I just wondered, in your experience, what are the best metrics that you've developed in looking at various projects and the successes?
Sure. It really depends on the nature of the collaboration and the ultimate goal, I think. So when I talked about setting goals, I think it's important to look at those over a continuum so that you've got some early goals, some things that you'd like to see start to roll. You've got some midterm goals and you've got an ultimate goal. It may take you several years to get to your ultimate goal. We were talking before the session started, and I was saying to folks that I've watched the emergence of the wine industry in Prince Edward County, and it's taken 25 years. That's a long, 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 long time. But it started with the idea of attracting a different group of people to that region and attracting them there, not only because of the beautiful natural resources, the beach and you know, those sorts of things, but also by creating a gourmet food trail. Things to get people interested in coming along. So many small goals along the way. So the specific metrics depend on what your goal are, I would position. Ones that I've seen that have worked really, really well are to see whether or not you can increase the number of jobs in an area. So that's a nice measurable impact of economic development. To see whether or not the activity that you're undertaking, if it has an economic impact, whether it has the ability to attract others. So an example that I can give you out of Prince Edward County, and forgive me if this has already been mentioned, we have an emerging wine industry. Some would say that it's really well established. I'd say it's still emerging. So one of the interesting things that's come along with that now is the development of an artisanal cheese industry. That's an ancillary. We've got an emerging wine industry. What goes well with wine? Well, let's see what we can get going on the artisanal cheese. And we're starting to see puzzle pieces coming together so that instead of having just a single goal, the goal begins to develop in a more robust way. So I think that's a concrete example that I can provide for you. Is that okay?
Any further questions?
Now, it sounds like your office plays a role in shepherding the partners through the partnership project or process from beginning to end. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
I think so, although I think I personally step back from the process once we get the connection well made. The role for the institution is to provide guidance and support. It's not to be directive. So I hope that Dr. Chan would say that we support her interests, we help her in whatever way we can to find and build those partnerships, but the actual delivery of the project, she has the freedom to go ahead and make that happen however she can with her partners.
So would your office do any follow-up at the end to see how the partnership went and if there were any issues, anything like that?
We often are involved along the way. It depends on what the arrangement is framed like. So on the more technical side, oftentimes we would be needing to monitor whether regular update reports are being submitted, that sort of thing. So that gives you a sense of whether things are moving along. And we often do follow up on our own. It's not prescriptive, we don't have to, but we do follow up on our own to see how that partnership has bloomed and whether there are other opportunities that can come out of that. So that's a desire on our part to expand our work.
Okay, last part. If there does arise problems, does your office take any role in facilitating any resolution?
Yes, absolutely. I hope both on the soft skill side, where we sit down with partners and talk about how things are going and where unanticipated roadblocks may have emerged. I certainly deal with lots of student issues. Everything happens to students. It's amazing. So we get lots of those issues floating across my desk. The unfortunate reality is that oftentimes we're working with partners who have very limited financial resources. So in the economic downturn, from time to time, we saw an industrial partner who wasn't able to meet their contractual commitments. And we work out different ways of managing that going forward, both with that partner, because we always want to retain the positive energy in the partnership. It doesn't become punitive. We don't sue people. We just don't have the resources to do that. But because we'd like to retain them as a possible future partner, at the same time, we have to work with our research team to make sure that they have sufficient resources to finish a project. And sometimes that means expanding your partnership base. Perhaps it means changing the project slightly, whatever it is. And we certainly try to be a support there for our research teams.
So I think with that, we'll have to conclude our first presentation from Susan, but on behalf of the group, Susan, thanks very much. This is an acknowledgement. There's a donation being made to the Prince Edward County Community Foundation. I got that right. So much appreciate your being here today, and again, thanks. So our next presentation will be by Stephen Adolf, and Stephen is at Queen's University as well, and he's the Director of Commercial Development with Engineering and IT. Sounds like hard stuff to me, so we're really thrilled that he's here. He's worked in a variety of fields, Bell Northern Research, Nortel, and co-founded our Carn Corporation, if I've got that pronounced correctly, and as part of that, through a joint venturing, $47 million was raised in venture capital. And I understand that he's been named an inventor on 5 patents. So he's obviously a man with diverse interests and diverse talents. So welcome, Stephen.
Thanks very much. I guess this will advance, will it?
Sorry. It's on the desktop.
Let's see if my PowerPoint training works here. Not that I stare at a computer all day long already. Thought I'd get a break from that for a moment. Come on. There we go. Okay. Slideshow. From beginning. Let's try that. Okay, so Susan Wood gave a great overview on the perspective from research services. I'm at the sort of the other end of the pipeline, so to speak, which is how to deal with the commercialization of invention at Queen's. And as was mentioned, my specific area is engineering and IT. But I just want to say that I've got quite a few slides, and I'm going to skip over some that are maybe less relevant and maybe more difficult to read looking at the fine print on them. But I wanted to say that in the context of university, tech transfer is fairly well known and understood. But my perspective coming from industry is that there are analogous things that can be done in the public sector that I think is worthy of discussion, how it could be extended, how the model from universities could be extended to the broader community. So my discussion, I'd like to start off with a brief introduction about tech transfer at the university and how it works. What role does it play within the university, and how do we fit into research activities on campus? And the problem of commercialization is an interesting one. There's a lot of facets, and how do we fit in that? And finally, if there's any questions, I'll be here for you. What is tech transfer? So the notion behind technology transfer is that inventions are created on campus. People have brainstorm ideas, and there needs to be some services brought to bear to help people get those inventions out into the public. Some popular examples of successful technology transfers. A researcher in Florida invented Gatorade. That was a campus invention, and that's quite a big deal. We all know what Gatorade is. I'll give you another very meaningful example. 97% of the cell phones in the world make use of a small mathematical algorithm developed by a researcher at University of Sherbrooke. And around 1989, a researcher solved a mathematical problem for how to forward data information in a very compact form over cellular transmission. And as a result, that technology has been adopted by standards and is in every phone on the planet practically. And that has generated, I think, in excess of over $500 million in revenue for University of Sherbrooke. So the mission for the job for technology transfer offices on campus is first to protect and commercialize intellectual property generated by inventors. And I'll also say we work with private individuals as well, and that's where some of the context for my comments comes from. We want to enhance and foster linkages with industry. I think that industry benefits from invention. whether it's done within their own offices or on campuses. And finally, to assist researchers in dealing with intellectual property. It's a very tricky field. There's a lot of issues that even the people who've been involved in intellectual property get surprised on a monthly basis with how this industry evolves. So there's a lot of interesting things going on. You may have heard the company I4I in Toronto recently successfully sued Microsoft and was awarded $290 million last week. That's an example of intellectual property law at work. Hope none of you work for Microsoft, by the way. So services we try to provide. First and foremost, technology offices are here on campus to provide assistance and service to the inventors. And so we view ourselves as providing some complementary things that maybe are not first nature for people who are focused on research areas. Things like business management for one, things like intellectual property management. But most importantly, I think access to funding. Commercialization is an expensive process. Even if you exclude the fact that people who want to be inventors and be in business need to earn salaries and need to put bread on the table, there's expensive prototypes, there's costs related to IP, there's commercial development and outreach, and a lot of different functions that require money. Intellectual property is also a very interesting area. It's not just about costs. Actually, intellectual property is a very challenging thing to get right. It's easy to get get the words that are specifically needed to create an invention in a patent application wrong and potentially scuttle your invention by mishandling your intellectual property. So there's actually a lot of skill in crafting IP correctly, as I've come to appreciate more and more while working at PARTEQ. And finally, I think business development is not an area where researchers are necessarily most comfortable. After all, you sort of gravitate to what you like, and I think that in a university environment, business development is a requirement for being able to advance research through commercialization. Our primary goal, of course, this may not be obvious, but I think our primary goal is to return the benefits of research to the public. After all, these institutions are publicly funded, and when research is created, when meaningful problems are solved, having them sit in the lab or sit in an IP vault somewhere is not a service to the community. And so that's the number one focus of technology licensing offices. A secondary value would be, of course, to be able to afford to pay everyone's salaries out of the proceeds, which is also very important, especially to my CEO. Company creation is something that's very important to the community. Technology licensing offices don't just license innovations to companies, they also create companies to leverage those inventions. And so those obviously have benefits to the community and impact communities large and small. I think that there's equally as many opportunities potentially in a rural environment as there is in places like Kingston. Making new technologies and products available is clearly one of the big benefits of research. After all, traditionally, one of the big areas for technology licensing is in new drug creation for pharma. And so I think that, for example, I think that warfarin, which is a common heart medication, blood thinner, was invented at University of Wisconsin, I believe. And that's a good example of a recent drug that's been transferred from university. Another big aspect of tech transfer is through the commercialization process, you create talented people who can by starting their career associated with the research program, can launch themselves into a career in the private sector. And so that can, again, it ties into creating value in businesses and also strengthens local industry by creating new industries to take the place of old. An example here of recent tech transfer from Queens is a company called Enerworks. Enerworks, the product from Enerworks is a solar heat collection system for residential hot water. And it was a very interesting and novel way of connecting a hot water heating panel to a water tank in a house. And there was some very novel thinking. We turned it into some patents. We created the spin-out, and that company is operating today, and you can buy Enerworks panels from a number of different places. I understand that Enerworks as a company was recently just sold to an acquirer. So this chart's been active for about 12 years, I think. This technology's been around for a while. So from a research perspective, how do we fit into the research program? This is one of the busy charts that I know that I can barely read, let alone anyone out there. The key to this chart is the yellow areas is where PARTEQ plays. So from the point of view of the inventive process, there's inventions and concepts can occur pre-grant, so early in the funding phase. It can come up as part of industrial interaction through Office of Research Services. We're very careful with ORS to make sure that the intellectual property is managed correctly when companies are involved. And it can get a little dicey when intellectual property gets intermixed with company IP as well. Invention can happen during the research program. And of course, before there's major publications, from the point of view of commercialization, we like to protect the IP so that the maximum benefit can be derived. So when should tech transfer offices be contacted? Well, obviously all the way through the process. We're absolutely critical. But certainly before you submit a grant, before you engage industry, it makes sense to contact a TT officer in the institution to make sure that you've considered things like intellectual property. To meet, it was mentioned briefly, there was a question about how do you fulfill contracts from research services. There are obligations that come with these contracts, and some of them impact the ownership of intellectual property and the reporting of intellectual property as a result of the research. And so we assist researchers in fulfilling those contract obligations. And this is a very important one. Public disclosures can take a lot of different forms, and the U.S. Patent Office doesn't discriminate between them. So a grad student presentation on campus is by all means a public disclosure. And so we, as an office, we ask that researchers make sure that we're aware of upcoming public disclosures. This is another killer. Before your abstract gets published on the web, often submissions are viewed as when the journal hits the presses and gets sent out in the mail. But in fact, with electronic media, it's easy to publish information pre-conference. And also, the notion of disclosure means if your abstract is overly descriptive and can tell not only what the subject of your invention is, but how to actually practice the invention, that can be essentially enabling and can scuttle your IP plans. So paying attention to every aspect of how you disclose your research is important when you feel there's IP involved. And certainly publications. So any journal publication or conference publication is important to make sure that your IP rights have been considered. So what is PARTEQ at the end of the day? What's our value add? How do we see ourselves? We try to provide the management capability to go through the commercialization process to really complement what's happening in research. We don't try to invent the light bulb, we merely try to market it. And I'm serious, I have a light bulb invention I'm currently trying to market. So if anyone's in the light bulb business, please contact me after the talk. We manage IP licensing. So licensing is really the down and dirty business end of dealing with invention, because you have to negotiate and you have to figure out how you're going to get the maximum value from intellectual property, whether it's through sole licensing, exclusive licensing to a company, or non-exclusive licensing to an entire industry. There's a lot of different facets to it that need to be considered. We create a lot of spin-outs at PARTEQ. Spin-out creation, I think, is really a very important aspect of commercialization, because it can have lasting benefits well beyond license. It takes a lot more work, it takes a lot more investment, but I think it has potentially bigger impacts on the community. Patent costs, they're not minuscule. They are significant. As was mentioned, I was lucky enough to be in the room when some inventions occurred in my previous company, and I had no idea what the costs associated with IP were. And gee, if I was paying the ride, I'm certain I wouldn't be an inventor today, because I wouldn't have done it. But thank goodness. And so PARTEQ does offset those costs of invention. And I guess the last aspect of commercialization is some researchers strongly want to be a part of commercialization of their inventions, and others strongly want to be researchers and researchers only. And so we provide, where necessary, those degrees of freedom for researchers so they can continue to do what they want. By way of flowchart, if any of these things could be put into a flowchart form, we thought we'd take a shot at it. Generally, our process works as follows. We receive an invention disclosure from researchers on campus or the community. We provide a 60-day turnaround on assessment of the intellectual property or the technology to see if we feel there's commercial potential. And we can choose to return at that point if we don't think there's commercial potential, but if we do, we'll sign an intellectual property agreement which binds the researcher and the university in an arrangement that transfers ownership of the IP to the institution, because researchers at Queen's fundamentally own their research. So we transfer the ownership to Queen's in exchange for commercialization services and a share of proceeds, and do a more detailed assessment. If we finally choose to commercialize, we can either say no to commercialization, return it to the inventors at that point, or carry on with commercialization, and that generally involves the filing and creation of patents. And then we head into a commercialization stage. And of course, every project that I'm currently working on has almost nothing to do with this chart, because everything is so unique and different. There's so many twists and turns. But this is sort of how it works. And for every business opportunity we take on, it's generally categorized as either a licensing opportunity or a spin-off creation potential. Just to talk for a few minutes about patents. What is a patent? A patent is an exclusive monopoly to make, use, or sell a claimed invention for a limited period of time. Pretty much every country in the world has a patent process. There's ways of tying patents from Canada, the US into international patents. But essentially, the spirit of the notion is this: in order to facilitate the adoption of a new technology and to overcome the costs of introducing that new technology, the government grants monopolies. And that prevents anyone else from practicing the content of that intellectual property. This is what happened to Microsoft against I4I. They basically integrated the software from I4I, and I4I had a patent, so that prevents, they had a monopoly on that. So here's a Dilbert. We all love Dilbert. I guess the notion here is that as soon as you create some IP, everyone's going to want to get their piece of it. But not all IP is created equal, and sometimes there's not much behind it. I'd say that Queen's has filed probably thousands of patent applications at this point, and the challenge with IP is being able to differentiate between pieces of IP that have commercial value and pieces of IP that merely stand alone as IP. That's one of the challenges of tech transfer. There are three patentability criteria. This may be clear to everyone, but novelty, non-obviousness, and utility are the three fundamental aspects of IP. So it has to be new. It can't have been done before. It can't be obvious to people who are skilled in the art. So putting 4 wheels on a car when cars with 3 wheels already exist might not be worthy of a patent. And it has to be useful. So now, I don't know how you define that, frankly, but that's the nature of it. And in terms of timeline, generally it can take up to 3 years to get a patent. So once a patent application is developed, you submit it to the patent office, and you begin to wait timeline-wise for the patent office to actually notice it, and then get back to you with their assessment of whether it is a patent or not. And the prosecution can take several years. We recently were awarded a patent that took 7 years from filing to the first issued patent. Documentation of the work is very critical. You have to be able to prove you came up with the idea first. You have to be able to prove that you possessed all of the invention at the time, et cetera, et cetera. So the point is, you have to document your work very carefully, because if it ever came into a legal situation, you have to be able to prove the invention was yours. By way of costs, here's a quick breakdown on some of the costs. The answer is that it can cost you between $15,000 and $35,000 these days to get a single U.S. patent from filing to issue, and those costs are pretty portable around the world. So Europe is a little more expensive because of all the jurisdictions. Japan needs translation. China needs translation. But the message is IP can be pricey. Some common assumptions. Patenting may hold back my career because I won't be able to publish my findings. You're free to publish once patent applications are filed. In fact, you're free to publish anytime. It just impacts whether or not you can create IP or not. And patenting could deny the public the benefits of my discovery. I think the contrary is true. If you don't create the monopoly by filing the IP, then you make it very difficult for companies to exploit it in a way that makes sense. And so oftentimes concepts that are available to everyone go nowhere. So PARTEQ as an organization, we've been around for about 25 years, and we've been able to be relatively successful as a tech transfer organization. Every institution has a technology office in one form or another. I'm lucky enough to work at PARTEQ, which is pretty mature in this business and has had a lot of experience both in spinning out companies and in licensing. So it's been a good model. Some takeaways. Organizations like PARTEQ can help commercialize ideas. I think it's, never underestimate the value of an idea and never underestimate the creative power of an entrepreneur, in my opinion. Basic research is an excellent source of new invention, but I have to say that PARTEQ, we get probably 15 to 20% of our disclosures from the Kingston area, and some of them are very interesting, and I find that it's very it can be troubling at times to understand how much support is available for researchers within institutions and how little support is actually available in the local community from government to facilitate management of inventions. So I think that that's something that would be interesting to understand, could be improved in the future. And it's not an either-or decision for researchers. You don't have to publish or patent. You can do both, and both have their place. On the final homework assignment, make sure you keep accurate records of your work if you're a researcher. So thank you very much for your time.
Again, we'll take time for a few questions if there are some. Okay, we have a question.
I have one question.
We have one here
You go first, please.
You've got a researcher, and you're trying to develop funds, and you want to go after some government funds. An idea, translate it into your office, go after funds. What kind of timeline are you talking? A year, 3 months, 2 years? How long does it take to get some of that government money?
It depends on the source. There are a number of sources available, I would say more on a local level, that are in the particular case of PARTEQ, we have funds from the federal government through Ontario Centres of Excellence, which are deployable at our own discretion, and that's in the range of $0 to $150,000. And if there are also Ontario-level programs managed by OCE. One of them that comes to mind is Market Readiness, that provides funding to commercialize, to move technology from research to commercialization, and that's about $85,000. And I would say, those kind of programs take 3 months. To get a more meaningful amount of money takes many months, but the smaller amounts can be done more quickly. And so I try to actually plan for my need for cash in that context with a project. So if a project comes in, I try to, on a timeline, say, when do I need to start applying, because I'm going to need the money in 3 months or 6 months. And then, of course, there are federally funded programs through IRAP and NSERC and different programs that are bigger. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Please go ahead.
I just had a question about the relationship between the university and the inventor. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the proportions and how that breaks down?
From the point of view of sharing of proceeds, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, researchers at Queen's own their intellectual property outright, and PARTEQ has the exclusive relationship with Queen's to negotiate that commercial arrangement with researchers on behalf of Queen's. And in order for Queen's to participate financially, they offer the services of PARTEQ to researchers. So that's why PARTEQ exists. Generally, we have a standard set of terms that we use to offer these services to researchers. So in exchange for ownership of the IP and a 50% share of the proceeds, PARTEQ services are provided to the researcher. And the researcher is not actually obliged to use PARTEQ here. So they always have the ability of using independent commercialization service, with the one proviso that if my office makes an offer to commercialize a technology and it's declined, then there is a small amount of proceeds that are obliged to the university in that case. But it's very small. So for the most part, the researcher is free to go their own way.
Okay, thank you for those questions. I think what we would like to do is Automotive Center of Excellence, which I understand is short form ACE. and develops future opportunities for ACE. And before that was connected with General Motors, was involved in cold weather testing, something appropriate for our country, with design, development, and construction of the ACE facility, again on loan at the time, I understand, from General Motors. So welcome.
Let's see if I can get this up here. So good morning, and the discussion is very well linked actually for what we're doing in with respect to this whole conference, theory to practice, and the creativity. What we are actually doing here is actually providing the tools for that creative process. The official name of the center is actually called the General Motors of Canada Automotive Centre of Excellence at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. That's quite a mouthful, so we call it ACE. And ACE is owned and operated by the university. And the high-level vision of ACE was to foster market-driven automotive engineering research and development with collaboration that will serve both universities and the automotive industry in areas of advanced automotive design. And I'm going to go through the presentation today on the history, industry, and academia together, the facility, and again, questions. The idea was conceived in 2003, announced in 2005, commissioned started commissioning in 2010, actually shovel in the ground in 2008, and we just had our grand opening actually yesterday. ACE is focused on Canadian automotive and technology. It's a bit of a misnomer because it's all about bringing ideas into a proof of concept. It's commercially available to perform engineering development and scientific research, which means, again, I want to emphasize that it is owned and operated by the university and commercially available to everyone. It is one of the foundation facilities of the UIT High Technology Research Park and provides collaborative opportunities for other outside industries, or customers as we call them. We provide collaborative opportunities for UIT and GMCL to work with each other, as well as UIT and other industries to work together. So we provide collaborative opportunities within what we're trying to establish as an automotive innovation network that includes both universities and industries and willing technology partners. It's a $100 million facility, $58 million from Ontario, $8 million from the Ministry of Training from Ontario, $28 million from the federal government in the KIP program, and $6 million invested from the university. GMCL also put in a $2 million in-kind donation, as well as Partners for Advancement and Collaboration Engineering is providing $60 million worth of computer-based hardware, engineering, software, instructor training. So what is ACE? ACE is where industry and academia are brought together. We're physically brought together. ACE is about discovery to commercialization, which again kind of links in I do work very heavily with the transfer technology department, and proof of concept. ACE is owned and operated by the university. It's really a place where engineers can get their hands dirty. It comprises of a core research facility, very, very large industrial labs, climate wind tunnel, environmental chambers, project bays, four-posters, and multi-axis shakers. It also incorporates an integrated research and training facility, and it provides floors, a couple of floors of industrial reconfigurable lab space, so it's project-based, and support shop and accesses, both for academic and industry, offices, hoteling offices, conference rooms, and support areas. The ACE business model, there's a potential to improve the founders' rates with the selling of capacity for the non-founders customers. So basically, the more utilization of the facility on a commercial basis on the outside lowers the rates for the university to do their research. So I have this very, very simple model. Basically, if you have a commercial rate that is not as aggressive, your founder's rate is a little lower, and over time gets a little better. But the more aggressively we sell and utilize the capacity in a commercialized sense, the better the rate. And you can see it is really dependent on how much outside activity we get in terms of utilizing our capital equipment. Our organization is very, very flexible. There is a lot of overlap is the point. And there's a lot of cross-function because the different types of technologies there, and again, a very, very lean, we have to be very commercially competitive. So we cannot have a lot of excess, so to speak. So what are we talking about? We're talking about industry working with the academic community, with government. Industry can work with government on separate government programs and not even with the university, but can work within the facility. Academic, of course, always is working with government with respect to some of granting. And then the greatest synergies actually is when you get industry, government, and the academic community actually all incorporated into a project. So we sell our capacity on a commercial basis. We'll facilitate customers on a one-to-one, or as I stated, within that circle, all those different combinations of utilizing gift in kind of your engineering skills, as well as getting the right finances to get the kinds of prototypes or proof of concepts that you need to physically build to actually get that idea to market. So it's all about getting science into reality, getting it off the shelf and into the community. We'll support industry with vehicle development work, advanced technology work and projects, engineering development, and research. We'll support the academic community with research and development work, and based on a project basis. The university is leveraged for many things: facilities, marketing, web-based, administrative systems and policies, technical resources through separately sponsored projects, IT support, legal. We are leveraging a founding partner, General Motors, for training and support and commissioning. They've already purchased about 1,800 hours for a guaranteed of 2 years within the work, some advanced technology work and best practices, and we will be utilizing outsourced services for legal, technical resources, warranty, tool room, fixturing, things like that. So we are not in the business of being a tool room. We have a lot of areas of focused research from our engineering department that is involved in a research plan with industry, and it involves vehicle thermal management, dynamics, electric hybrids, alternative fuels, manufacturing and materials, and automotive communication software and electronics. The core research facility, really the magnet for the place, is this very, very large climatic wind tunnel. It has speeds in excess of 240 kilometers per hour, but it is not a typical wind tunnel in the fact that it goes from -40 to +60. It controls humidity. We can create a blizzard. As a matter of fact, we did that yesterday morning. We had a blizzard in there, and we can go from driving rain to hurricane to dry Arizona or equator heat. Let's see if my... This machine actually is 5 stories high, about a football field long and a half football field wide. It's so large, in fact, we actually have to move the corner out of the way to get the physical property into the tunnel. And once it's in the tunnel, we actually have a large 1,000 horsepower dynamometer, so that vehicle will actually run as if it was on the road, downhill, uphill, wherever. We are the one-of-a-kind facility in the world. With this dynamometer is over 100,000 kilograms. We literally plug and play it into a table and are able to run vehicles under full load and then move them into the crosswind. There is no place on earth that can do this kind of development. It is absolutely innovative, an innovative approach. As well, it has a variable nozzle, and that nozzle is that opening where the wind comes in. There is no other nozzle like this on the planet, and it allows us to do anything from motorcycles to large transport trucks, or green energy, or other technologies. As a matter of fact, as we get further into it, and being in the academic community, the applications are very far-ranging into green energy, in terms of own the podium for Olympic training. You can imagine Hollywood North, command centers, all different. So it's all about, you can see it's a very, very large chamber. In fact, in past you would have had to build 3 separate facilities to do the capability that this one facility can do. We also have another chamber that's actually large enough for a large articulating bus, and it has solar arrays and another dynamometer and that same temperature control and humidity. We have a smaller climate chamber, and by all means it's a very large chamber. So these are not things you put on the university lab shelf. They're in fact very, very large, and they're very meant for large prototyping, proof of concept development. We have garage services available. We have this 4-poster. It's a drive-on 4-poster. It actually goes underneath the wheels or any structure. As a matter of fact, you can put a flight simulator on this. And it basically has control of one axis up and down, but with 4 different cylinders. We place that also in a climatic chamber as well. It drives from -40 to +60. So we now have 4 different kinds of chambers. We can have a snowstorm in one, we can have Arizona heat in another, we can have a nice spring day in another, and we can be having a driving rain in the other. We have a 5th cell. It's in an anechoic chamber, or basically a soundproof chamber, and it simulates basically a physical property being out in the open where, if shaken or whatever it does, the sound generally doesn't reflect. Well, we can take that environment and bring it into a smaller room, and then what we put on it was a 3-dimensional shaker, a multi-axis simulation table. There's only about 9 of these in the world, 2 in North America, and we have the 1 in Canada. It's an inverted hexapod, but basically provides exact 3-dimensional shaking. It's provided for structural development. The previous 4-poster has 19 G's worth of force, so if you wanted to put bridge sections or civil applications, there is a lot of structural durability and fatigue research and development that you can do on this. So we also have what I spoke about was that integrated research and training facilities. And what it offers, and up in the right corner, it offers what we call reconfigurable labs. So you have a project, you get a grant, you come in, you have a space to work, you work your project, you get your offices, your conference, your project's done, and then another industry. It is really focused to get industry and the academic community involved together practically, and actually industries demanding, of course, a timeline to be in and out and finished. So ACE is really a place to develop partnerships that can leverage industries and academia's complementary strengths and capabilities. ACE is commercially available. It's a place to perform vehicle development. It's a place to perform any advanced development or proof of concept. And it's a place to perform validation, testing, and research. There's a lot more technical information and opportunities that you can find actually on our website.
That's great. Thank you very much. We will take time for 2 or 3 specific questions of John, and then we will open it up for a broader discussion. So what questions do we might have for John?
One question I have, John, is the cost associated with building the facility. I think you may have mentioned it, but it's clearly something on a very grand scale. Any information about the timelines and the costs associated with creating what is now a resource both for the university community and, of course,
I'm
industry.
sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
So costs and timelines for that beautiful research facility.
Well, you mean the original cost? That's a great question, because nothing ever starts as it ends. So the original cost actually was a smaller center of $58 million, and it has grown actually into a more capable facility with all these other actually floors of commercialization space to support the original, quote, wind tunnel idea. So it's taken over 10 years to get to a concept. 2002, it was conceived. Shovel in the ground didn't happen until 2008. A lot of government money involved, again, as you can see, and actually an extension with the Knowledge Infrastructure Fund actually increased the capabilities and provided actually more capabilities for more broad a range of research. So it wasn't just thermal development, it's structural development, it's anything you need to bring an idea that is in a large sense out to commercialization. So when you look at it, 2002 to 2011, it's 9 years of span. It took over a year, actually, to take this center. It's over 16,000 square meters of research and development center. It took over a year just to get the foundation out of the ground. There's 3 stories underneath. You can imagine with 19 G's worth of force, there's a lot of concrete underneath. And with the size of the facility, of the size of the climatic wind tunnel, 5 stories high and a football field long, it took a little while. As well as it's a one-of-a-kind facility. So the university did not build the average or a common climatic wind tunnel. It has a solar array that provides sunrise to sunset. It provides this variable nozzle. It provides the ability of moving hundreds of thousands of pounds of machine and providing crosswind technology that simply isn't available anywhere on the planet. So the combination of those technologies and the innovation of bringing those different pieces together took years of development and engineering. So it was a very, very, very large project.
Thank you. What's the response been from the private sector thus far? Like, do you have a range of clients that are already interested in using the facility outside of the founding?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Matter of fact, my biggest problem so far, and I hope it continues, is telling people to be patient before they come in, because we're actually calibrating and doing correlations in this equipment. So in fact, I do have a waiting list of customers. I have already entertained a couple of customers on a cooperative basis to see whether in fact they could do their work. It is an automotive as well. It's automotive, it's actually green energy, a lot of solar people. There's defense and aerospace is extremely interested. And there is a lot of capacity to be sold still, so to speak. When you're talking a climatic wind tunnel, we have to be competitively commercially available. So you're talking in the neighborhood of $1,200 to about $1,500 per hour. Those other 4 cells are at about $350 per hour. And in the middle of all this, you actually have to have that support services and places where you can build up those prototypes, get them in and tear them in and get another customer in and out. So yes, we have a very fortunate circumstance with our founding partner, General Motors, who has already purchased 1,800 hours, which allows at least a shift's worth of work, which allows me to actually get a team on board very, very quickly. So it's a nice way to start a business with 2 years of business already booked.
One more question? Okay, if not, let me thank John, and then we're going to open it up for a broader discussion. So, again, on behalf of all of us, so again, thanks to our presenters. We do have a general question here that I'm going to invite our presenters to comment on. It's in our bulletin and our program, and also for the audience to participate in this discussion. So the question is, what actions need to be taken to enhance training, education, and commercialization for the creative rural economy industry sector. So what actions need to be taken to enhance training/education and commercialization for the creative rural economy industry sector? So I'm not sure if one of our panelists wants to take a stab at that question to start with, or if somebody from the audience wants to be the first to go, but we'll just open it up and see where this discussion takes us. Okay, that's great. Stephen?
So I just would like to comment that I think in the context of the broader community in Canada, I think there's an opportunity to create a more level playing field between the resources that are available within academic institutions for commercialization and those that are available to the average citizen. I see quite a gap, in fact, and it can be very simple. It can be as much as private inventors needing to have a day job and support efforts to commercialize technology at the same time. I can imagine that can be quite a challenge in a rural environment where you know, it can be challenging to find enough time in the day to do both manage a business and keep income coming for the family. So I think there's a potential there for some consideration.
Any lessons from your own patent seeking, whether there's anything you can share that would tie into that?
Well, just to be clear, I went through. I was part of the optical networking industry craze 10 years ago, which created this environment where people could start companies relatively easily. I took it for granted at the time that someone would be paying my salary while I had the freedom to create, you know, basically 5 patents and found a company. And yeah, I just took it fundamentally for granted. But I think that economic times have changed, and my bubble has deflated. I'm back down to earth again, and I think it's more. In order to facilitate invention more across the board in a broader set of sectors, it's a much more challenging thing.
John, you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah. I think it's very, very important with respect to a rural community or any community is the universities across the nation have an amazing amount of facilities and resources that are available and not necessarily over-capacitized or wholly used. It would be in terms of what are the actionable needs is the access to that technology or to those labs or to those equipment that perhaps may sit idle out in the university, so they're not getting perhaps 100% utilization. You're only getting 5 or 10% utilization. Tremendous discovery comes from them, but in terms of that actual investment that the taxpayers may make into that university and the utilization of some of that technology, it'd be wonderful to get access, and not for free, of course, on a commercial need, to those resources or that equipment. Because again, falling back on the Automotive Center of Technology, it's commercially available to anyone. So you don't have to, only large companies can build $50 million wind tunnels, but now here's a place where you can have a graduate student with an idea that needs maybe 8 hours to develop something, and they can actually get access to a technology. They'd never need it for the rest of their product ever again, but now there's an opportunity, in fact, to use a $100 million tool that would have been economically out of your grasp. So there's a lot of both resources from the universities in terms of intellectual resources. There's a lot of physical resources that are available, and if they could be made more accessible to the public to do the kinds of things they need to do or could do, or before wouldn't even conceive to do because they couldn't even afford to even think of being able to have access to that. So I think making our universities across the nation more accessible to everyone in terms of the utilization of both the intellectual resource and the physical capital.
In my best academic verbiage, that's very cool. Question.
I think though one of the major challenges for individuals coming out of the rural environment is giving up the ownership of the technology. Is there any middle ground in that for these people?
Actually, it's a really good question. If you're specifically talking about intellectual property, there's a distinction between inventor and owner or assignee of the intellectual property. There are actually a number of issues that might prevent someone from wanting to stay owner of a technology that ended up being a part of a commercial venture. For example, liabilities. Individuals need to be sheltered from commercial liability, and that's what a corporate structure does. So a common question that I get asked is, or an issue that I have to overcome is the distinction between remaining an inventor and remaining an owner. And I think the practical answer is that it actually makes a lot of sense when everything's considered to kind of separate the emotional aspect of being, this is my baby and now you're asking me to separate from my baby. There's no question that's an issue, but I think the pragmatic answer is that even in the context where there's no company involved, it makes sense to shelter yourself from liability.
Good question. Do we have another question? I think I saw several hands up.
Thank you. This time I'm going to introduce myself, if I may. I'm from Centennial College, and I'm interested in trying to find out if there are some perspectives from the community college sector. And if I could just take that question and maybe just put aside the commercialization piece for a moment and talk about maybe through education, what can, for instance, community colleges do? And I think we need more leadership. Colleges are very flexible. They're very able to adapt to, I guess, the current realities. We can maybe turn on a dime sometimes faster than universities can. And I think if we have that leadership to look at new programs that address some of the needs that are, in this case, relevant to the creative rural economies. And in my college, we've got a relatively new program in cultural and heritage tourism. And there aren't many in this country, to be honest with you. And I think it's proved very interesting to opening a number of doors to, if you like, inform the tourism community on the cultural, opportunities and vice versa. And believe me, they are two quite distinct realities in many cases. So our goal is through a number of symposia and workshops and the beginnings of a Culture and Heritage Institute to be able to work together in those two distinct areas, even though, I think the community at large might think that they're well informed about one another. And we also have a new program starting up, Cultural and Heritage Site Management, and within that program, and I feel some responsibility here, I think we're probably at the forefront in having an actual course called Municipal Cultural Planning. How can you be in cultural and heritage management if you don't understand this relatively new field of endeavor and how the collaborative process will certainly improve relations all across any community, whether it's a city, a rural community, etc. So colleges probably can be even more proactive in this regard, and I'm just wondering if there are any other perspectives out there.
Certainly. A great set of comments. Thank you for those. Any other perspectives from the audience or, of course, our panel, if they would like to comment on that?
I'd actually like to comment on that. I think we're just thrilled to collaborate with colleges when we can, because the colleges are often, via their mandate, tasked with serving the communities in which they are based, whereas universities often have this global field that they're trying to play in, and sometimes the incentive structures in universities work against these partnerships and the commercialization processes that are very applied, when often academics in universities are really rewarded primarily through their publications. I find when I work with my community college partners, it's refreshing to see that their incentive systems often are aligned better with making a positive impact right where they are geographically located. So I think the comments that you have made have been extremely helpful, and I do think that when we think about education and its impacts, we should think of even our schools. It's not just tertiary educational institutions that make contributions to their communities, it's all of us. May I digress and just say one thing, and then I promise I'll say nothing more. I don't want anyone in this room to leave thinking that either colleges or universities are wealthy, that we have lots of resources. There was a sense earlier in the discussion that that perhaps we are, and we are in many ways, privileged, but I have to say that's because we have the freedom to think and to use our resources with some discretion, but there are not many. And the reality that I live in, at any rate, at Queen's, and I'm sure you experience at your college, is that we are, in fact, in situations that are very constrained. And currently at Queen's, for instance, we're struggling to recover from a deficit situation. So we do have labs, we do have research facilities, we do have programs that we want to make more accessible, and to the extent they exist, they should be embedded in the communities that we are based in. But please know that your dollars as community partners and funding agencies, and I see representatives in the room, are very much needed, because we don't have them, and at times programs close, facilities close, centers close without your support.
It's a thankful dose of reality. Thanks for that, Yolande. Simon Forbes.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to something that Dr. Wood talked about that I thought that was quite pertinent to answering the question, and that's building relationships. In the rural area, a lot of us have community colleges. We don't always have universities in our backyard, but we do have community colleges either in our small town or in the neighboring town. And building relationships, phoning people up, having a lunch, talking about their programs, learning about the opportunities, and sharing your ideas, I think is a key to moving this forward and taking advantage of the resources they have.
Great comment. Thank you for that. I see our time is at 12:45. I'm going to ask our panelists if they have any final comments that they would like to offer, and it's fine if you don't, and then we'll adjourn, because I suspect people will be here shortly for lunch. So, any final comments?
My only final comment is that I watch Dragon's Den all the time, and I just think it would be great if there were alternatives for people in the broader Canada that didn't involve either doing nothing or applying to Dragon's Den for management of their commercial ideas. So.
There must be a new program there for you, Yolande.
I have to confess that we just invited one of the dragons from Dragon's Den to speak here at Queen's, and he was part of a panel who adjudicated some ideas. He did actually do a service, though, so nicely said.
John, anything final?
No, just yes, I do. I guess it's with respect to, again, the access to opportunity, and I think both colleges and universities have a wonderful potential to explore outside their past models and be a little bit more creative in terms of outreaching to both rural, basically to all their Canadian citizens, in terms of the resources available, as well as from reciprocating from the outside industrial community or even private community in terms of investing in that kind of energy and perhaps some funding into the institutions. So I think it has to be both two ways of funding and two ways of interacting.
So first, let me thank all of you. We're a small group, but we're a good group, so thank you for your participation and contributions, and thanks again to our panel.